Sergei Loznitsa is Ukraine's most important filmmaker. Known mostly for his documentaries, Loznitsa takes footage found in archives and edits it into a seamless story, typically without narration or intertitles. His films have explored the siege of Leningrad, Soviet life as captured on newsreels from the 1950s and 1960s, the 1991 protests that led to the collapse of the Soviet system, a 1930s Stalinist show trial, Stalin's funeral in 1953, and the Holocaust in Ukraine. He has also made documentaries where we watch Ukrainian protesters on Maidan Square, tourists visiting a former concentration camp, or Russians taking part in Victory Day celebrations in Berlin. Loznitsa's films introduce us to crowds, those in the past and those in the present. Let's look at them and join them for a minute. When he finished Maidan in 2014, his film about the 2013 protests that erupted in Kyiv, Ukraine, Loznitsa stated, "To see, you need to take a few steps back. When I would set up the camera, I would make sure that no individual dominated the frame, that each episode was a multifaceted composition where each element is on a par. In this respect, it's an epic film. It's the people who interest me. People lived through something terrible, and you could see it on their faces. The self-organization was impressive, considering that no one was commanding others." Loznitsa's cinematic version of Maidan thus captures a central truth about the months of protest on that Kyiv square. Ukrainians came together in what they called a revolution of dignity, one characterized by self-organization in order to make political demands. The year after filming protests in Ukraine, Loznitsa released his film The Event, about the St. Petersburg protests of August 1991, as Soviet citizens in that city took to streets and squares during the attempted coup against Mikhail Gorbachev. Anton Dolin, the prominent Russian film critic, has characterized the film in the following way. There were slogans and rallies, fears and hopes, barbed wire and leaflets, politicians and townsfolk. There were, in other words, people. Loznitsa's film is about them. Loznitsa's documentaries, including The Event, are canvases where he becomes a witness to history, inviting us to look. The crowds of people in his film The Trial, and again in State Funeral, allow us to see Stalinism as a spectacle. The chilling footage in The Trial reveals the mechanisms of state terror under Stalin, and how show trials became public events, where those in the audience, and by extension, those of us watching, are exhorted by state prosecutors to demand their commitment to rooting out perceived enemies of the state, however ridiculous and grandiose the charges were against them. Inside the courtroom, Soviet audience members clap thunderously. Outside, we see crowds demanding that the state enemies be put to death. We see similar crowds, perhaps even some of the same people, in State Funeral. This time they march by Stalin's corpse in Moscow's House of the Unions, or demonstrate their commitment to the dead deity in Novgorod, Bishkek, then called Frunze, or the far north. In one stunning scene, we see the Orthodox Church hierarchy genuflect before Stalin's corpse. Anton Dolin, the film critic, has written that a Loznitsa documentary, quote, requires active participation, conjecture, intellectual and emotional work from the audience. Otherwise, it won't be interesting, unquote. And therein lies a deeper meaning of his films. Loznitsa wants the audience to engage, to immerse themselves, to puzzle through the clues left to us from the past. The lack of scripted narration therefore asks the viewer to make sense of what he or she has seen. We join the crowds, jostle with protesters, gaze at events unfolding before us, and think about what we may or may not do.